Hey everyone, welcome back to the Civil War Battle Games. We've had a few interesting episodes and today we are going to be breaking down the Battle of Gettysburg. This is definitely going to be a good battle as both teams seem to have a lot of advantages and even some disadvantages. Riley, why don't you tell us about some stats from the North?
The North is looking pretty promising with this war. You see, the North is much more populated with a total of 23 million people, leaving us with a lot more players on the North's team, opposed to the South's, which has a lot less players. In the battle tonight, the North had around 85,000 players and the South had 75,000. The North is in a charge of manufacturing a lot of goods in the United States, which works out to be a huge advantage for this side. Carly, would you like to give us some stats on where the South stands?
Of course. So we have a few advantages over in the South. You see, the South is fighting for a cause, their way of life. We've seen previously that can do a lot for a team. Not only that, we also see that 7 out of 8 military colleges are here in the South, which means their players are coming from lots of experience and their coaches are very well trained. Most battles have been fought in the South and everyone knows about home field advantage.
This picture shows the location of most major battles. The orange states are Confederate, while the blue are border and the green are Union.
Alright, thank you both for giving us a little bit of background information on both teams. But let's not forget about the disadvantages. Riley, I'm going to throw it right back to you. That way you can tell us about the South's disadvantages.
Let's see. The South is going to have a hard time beating the North with their team being smaller than ours. Tonight, the South has almost 10,000 players less than the North. Plus, the North does manufacture a lot of the goods the South needs for battle and even their daily life, like food. Sure is going to be tough to beat that.
It sure seems like the North is coming into the battle with a lot on their table, but let's hear from Carly on the disadvantages of the North. Carly, over to you.
Thanks, Gabby. So the North does seem to have a lot of good things coming with them. However, their cause behind the game is going to be easy to beat against the South. The North primarily wants to restore the power in the South to surrender this battle. The North's only motivation is to put the South back in its place, but the South hasn't budged. They are fighting for their livelihood. Back over to Gabby.
Okay, to finish off before heading over to the battlefield, we're going to talk about the coaches on both sides. They obviously have a lot to do with the way the players play and even the outcome of the battle. We're going to start off with Riley and the North coaches, so over to you.
So for the North, we have Ulysses S. Grant. He has a lot of wins this season and is one of the most well-known coaches we've seen. It's predicted he'll be the one to win the playoffs and final game. Coach George B. McClellan also is a name to remember. Instead of using strategies against the other team, he likes to go at the South with full force. Even though he's not a coach, the manager of the North, Abraham Lincoln, has helped us a lot this season. He's put a lot of new rules in the playbook, even one that has let African Americans play. This greatly helped the North motivation to win.
The North definitely has some promising coaches, but let's hear about the Confederate coaches. Over to you, Carly.
The manager of the Confederate team is Jefferson Davis. He provides a lot of the team's land and naval strategies. Next is the head coach, Robert E. Lee. He led the team in very important games like Antietam and the game we'll be watching tonight in Gettysburg. Another coach being Stonewall Jackson. He is one of the most skillful tacticians we've seen this season. That leads us to tonight's game. Back to you, Gabby.
I'm here in Union's territory, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where it's all unfolded. This is a 3-day-long game from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, which has resulted in the most injuries to players this season. The Confederate team was led by Coach Robert E. Lee and the Union team by George G. Meade. At the end of this game, the Union team had 23,000 player injuries, while the Confederate team had 28,000 player injuries. Unfortunately, these injuries ended a lot of careers and took away over a third of the Confederate team. This is believed to be the last game of the season if the Confederates won. However, this game ended in Union victory, and it was the last time the Confederate team chose to play away from home. This was definitely a crushing defeat from the South. Let's talk about postseason stats.
Yes, sadly, the Union's team manager, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated. 5 days after the end of the war and surrender of the Confederate forces, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Lincoln was at the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., watching a play when he was assassinated. Lincoln watched the play in a private booth with his wife, Henry Rathbone, and Rathbone's wife, John Wilkes Booth, snuck in the box and shot Lincoln in the head. The audience thought the commotion was part of the performance, but shortly realized it was not. Although he did not die immediately, after being transported across the street, Lincoln passed. Union troops went after Booth and surrounded him in a barn and caught it on fire. When going inside to retrieve him, Booth was shot and pronounced dead a couple of hours later. However, before his death, Lincoln and others proposed plans for Reconstruction. Carly, would you like to give us some of the information?
Absolutely. Lincoln's main goal was to unify the North and the South after the war. He wanted to focus on forgiveness rather than punishment. He announced the proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction in order to reunify the Union. He also introduced the 10% plan, which stated that if 10% of the registered voters in a once seceded state swore an oath of allegiance, that state could rejoin the Union. All Southerners would be completely pardoned except the high-ranking officials and generals of the Confederacy. His goal was to end the war swiftly while still trying to keep the people of the United States somewhat united. Gabby, would you like to tell us about Johnson's Reconstruction plan?
Of course, Johnson believed that, like Lincoln, the war had been fought to preserve the Union. He constructed a lenient plan based on the former 10% plan, but this allowed for former Confederate leaders to regain their places of power in local and national governments, which created tensions. Like Lincoln's plan, men were granted amnesty along with the returning of their property. They were required to uphold the 13th Amendment and pay off their debts. Then they could rewrite their state constitutions, hold elections, and start sending representatives to Washington again. Confederate leaders could request pardons from Johnson, in which he granted over 13,000, even the former president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Riley, let's head over to you to finish up with the Reconstruction with the Radical Republicans' plan.
Thanks, Gabby. So the Radical Republicans feared that Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction was not harsh enough, that the South should be punished for initiating the war. They believed that blacks should be able to have the same opportunities as whites and introduced the Freedmen's Bureau Bill. However, it was vetoed by President Johnson, who claimed that it would inflate the size of the government and that blacks had the same rights of property and person as whites. After this statement, for the first time in history, moderate and radical Republicans joined together to overturn the Civil Rights Act veto.
Thanks, Riley. Now let's head over to Carly so she can give us the pros and cons of Reconstruction.
There are often debates on whether Reconstruction was an accomplishment or not for freedmen. The Freedmen's Bureau was created and it helped assist freed slaves. The Civil Rights Act was created that gave African Americans citizenship and protected said citizenship. The 14th Amendment was also granted and promised African Americans equal protection from the law and was very similar to the Civil Rights Act. The 15th Amendment stated that the people could not be denied the right to vote because of their race. However, many argue that these protections didn't actually do anything. It was very difficult for blacks to get jobs and an education. Black codes were passed to keep freedmen the supply for cheap labor and were ultimately designed to keep African Americans dependent. The Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow laws were passed, making freedmen fear for their lives. The 15th Amendment was counteracted by the literacy test and the grandfather clause. Although Reconstruction looks like a positive thing on the outside, when looking deeper, it harmed freedmen rather than helping them.
Thanks, Carly. Well, everyone, this brings tonight's show to a close. We want to thank you all for tuning in, and we can't wait to see y'all next time.